Kia ora, my name is Cherise. I'm the nutritionist for Harbour Sport. In this session, we're covering carbohydrates or carbs. Are they a friend or a foe? There's a lot of misinformation and misunderstanding about this food group, about whether or not we should be including it in our diet, what are the best sources for our health, and how much should we be having. All carbohydrates, with the exception of milk, are found in plants. So all our food that grows from a plant is considered a carbohydrate. That includes our grains, beans, peas, fruit, vegetables, and even some nuts and seeds have a little carbohydrate included in them. In milk, the sugar called lactose is a form of carbohydrate. So why do we need them in our diet? All carbohydrates, after they are eaten, are broken down through digestion into simple sugars, which are absorbed into the blood and then taken up into cells by the action of insulin, a hormone which is like a key unlocking the muscle cells. When the muscle cells have taken up all they need, some is stored in the liver and any extra is actually stored as fat. And that's where sometimes the concern about our carbohydrate intake can occur. But for the most part, they are the preferred form of energy for our body and our brain. Yes, we can use protein and we can use fat, but they're not as an efficient system as carbohydrates. It's much easier for our body to use the fuel source of carbohydrates. We can train our bodies to be more efficient at using protein and fat, but carbohydrates are the preferred energy source in the first instance. Also, because much of it comes from plants, it also has valuable nutrients such as fiber, vitamins, and minerals included. So that's why it's important to include it in our diet. So some of the best sources include whole grains and whole vegetables, fruit and legumes, because they provide fiber, minerals, and vitamins and take longer to break down in our bodies to simple sugars. As we said, the body breaks down all carbohydrate to sugars and takes some into cells for energy, and surplus is stored in the liver and as fat deposits. High blood sugar can damage the cells in our bodies, including the pancreas, which tries to regulate blood sugar by producing insulin. And that's why it's important to choose foods which break down to sugar or glucose more slowly to support the pancreas to do its work efficiently. Whole grains give us energy more evenly and slowly than carbohydrates which have been highly processed and have extra added sugar. Carbohydrates which have been processed a lot, so they're cooked or turned into another product altogether, break down much more quickly, meaning we have energy available quickly, and our bodies can often have more than it needs in the amount of energy that it takes in. We'll talk more about this later. To a lesser extent, our colourful vegetables and greens also give us carbohydrates because they are from plants and provide many other beneficial nutrients which support our whole body health. So these include B vitamins, vitamin C and antioxidants, as well as other things. So include a wide variety of lots of different colours of vegetables and fruit in your day-to-day eating. How much should we be having? Current Ministry of Health guidelines recommend 6 servings of carbohydrates per day. This highlights grain-based products, but you could also include starchy vegetables such as potato, kumara, taro, sweet corn, yams, and cassava. The idea is to have a wide variety over the day and to make it as close to nature as possible. So we don't want to have 6 servings of toast as our only source of carbohydrate. Try and mix it up a little bit. And then on top of this, we also have at least 5 serves of vegetables and fruit, which also provide some carbohydrate, but we have the vegetables and fruit for different reasons than the carbohydrate sources. Some people might find that 6 servings is too much for them if they also eat a lot of protein, so it's fine to have 4. In this slide, we can see how different sources of carbohydrate have different amounts of serving sizes. So in the previous slide, we saw that it's recommended to have 4 to 6 servings per day, and each serving is a different amount depending on what the carbohydrate food is. So we can see that it might be a different amount of rice, whether it's brown rice or white rice, that cornflakes is a lot more than if it might be some cooked pasta. So we look at these different amounts according to what the carbohydrate is made up of. So let's look at a couple of myths. Do carbs make you fat? What we're thinking about mostly is type and quantity. Carbohydrates have the same amount of energy as protein and less than half the energy of the same quantity of fat. And as we've seen, carbs come in a variety of different foods, so it's not correct to say all carbs are bad and that we need to avoid them. Instead, we need to be thinking about it like fats, that whether we are choosing a healthy one which will benefit and nourish our body, or if we're choosing a poor source that can add to health concerns. So this is where we're looking at portion sizes and serving sizes and the variety in the diet. We're also thinking about the quality of them. Have they been highly processed? If carbohydrates are already in a simple form like sugars, white flour, or have been highly processed and turned into products that don't resemble the original food that they were, our bodies don't need to do a lot of work to turn it into the simple sugars, and that can mean that we have more energy than what we need. And it also means that the simple sugar goes into our blood quickly and raises our blood sugar, which we don't want to be doing too often. Our bodies have methods to store the extra energy, as we've already discussed, but anything that is above that gets stored in fat, and that's where it becomes a problem. So not only do we need to be thinking about the type of carbohydrate, we also need to look at how much, and that's why we have the portion sizes recommendations, as we said. And finally, we also have a measure called the glycemic index, and this gives a value to different carbohydrate foods based on how quickly they're broken down to simple sugars compared with a reference of pure glucose. So the reference of pure glucose is set at 100, and other foods are compared to this. The idea is that we try and have foods that have a lower number. So foods that have a high GI value, that's around about over 70, mean they're broken down to simple sugars very quickly in the body and can cause a spike in blood sugar. And foods that have a lower GI value, a lower number compared to the 100 reference value of glucose, take longer to break down and give us energy more evenly. We're advised to include more low GI foods and less high GI foods. There are a few factors which can affect the glycemic index value. These include processing. So whole grains have a lower glycemic index value than those which have been ground into flour. Different types of grains can have a different GI value. So for an example, brown rice has a lower GI than white rice. And also cooking can change the GI value. For example, cooked cold potato has a lower GI value than hot cooked potato because how the starch changes as it cools down affects how quickly the body turns that food into the simple sugar. Here's a few smart swaps that we're looking at. And we're all about practicing progress, not perfection. So if you're starting in the column that has the least healthy options, we're looking towards moving up to the ideal options, but along the way, looking just for small improvements that are sustained over the long term. And the foods that are in the least healthy column, they're there because they've had a lot of processing done to them. They don't really resemble the food group that they once were from. So they don't resemble the grains or the potatoes that they came from. And they've also had extra things added to them. So extra fat, extra salt, extra sugar. And in the improved column, there still has been quite a lot of processing done, but the food has still retained some of its goodness. And then in the ideal column, we've got whole grain sources of carbohydrates. So we have whole grain oats made into porridge, and we have whole grain crackers where we can see the different seeds. And these are ideal because Being in the whole grain form, they take longer to break down in your body, so release glucose more slowly. And they also have other nutrients like fiber and vitamins and minerals. And in this column, we see some more examples that we're moving from white bread, hopefully up to the ideal of whole grain bread. And it's okay to take little steps along the way. So if you prefer white bread, but you're wanting to get into a state of having whole grain bread to improve your health, you might have one slice of white bread on your sandwich and one slice of wholemeal bread in the middle in the improved column, which has a bit more fiber. And then over time, you might be moving up to having 2 slices of whole grain bread to make up your sandwich, and white bread is no longer in your house. And finally, in the bottom, we have processed rice products made with rice flour. So that might be rice that's been cooked and then ground into a flour, and it might be producing something like noodles or dumpling wrappers or something like that. And it's still a carbohydrate source, but the processing of that food has turned it into something that it breaks down into simple sugars quite quickly. And then you might have white rice, which is a little bit more improved. And then finally, ideally, brown rice, which contains more fiber and that sort of thing. So finally, just a few questions. If milk has a type of sugar in it, which is lactose, should we be having it? So lactose is a natural sugar found within plain unflavoured milk, and it can't be separated out. Flavoured and sweetened milks have extra sugar added and should be limited to occasional, especially for children. Milk has many beneficial parts to it, including vitamin D, calcium, and protein. So getting back to whether or not we should be having milk if it's got that lactose sugar, the carbohydrate, one question we get asked about a lot is that you might have noticed that plain milk with reduced fat, so that's the bottles with green top, a yellow top, or a light blue top, so reduced fat milk, seems to have more sugar or more lactose written on the label than those with more fat, which are the dark blue or silver top milks. That's because when the fat is removed from the milk, so it's skimmed off the top, they lose some of the volume of the milk in the bottle. And companies won't sell a bottle that has some missing, so they make up that volume by adding in more fat-reduced milk. Reduced fat milk. So fat takes up room. So when you remove that, you need to fill up that room with more milk, and that's why the lactose is higher in reduced fat milks than it is in full fat milks. So hopefully that answers that question for some people. Another question we get asked about is gluten bad for me? So this is becoming more widely known about. There are a lot of people that do have gluten intolerances and sensitivity. And gluten is a protein found within some grains like wheat, barley, rye, and a few others. And so obviously the products made from those grains also have gluten in them. Some people are very sensitive to it. There's a condition called celiac disease, which is a permanent autoimmune response to gluten, where the body thinks that the gluten is toxic and attacks the cells in the intestines, which causes pain and cramps. It can damage the intestines. There can be digestive distress like diarrhea or vomiting or constipation. Some people also have a severe type of dermatitis that affects their skin when they have celiac disease. And the damage to the intestine can mean that over time the person loses weight, and they also have nutrient deficiencies because the body stops absorbing nutrients, the goodness from food properly, because that all happens mostly in the intestine where the damage is happening. And the only treatment for celiac disease is lifelong abstinence, so not eating foods which contain gluten. It's estimated that 1 in 100 people in New Zealand have this condition. And because many of the carbohydrate foods that we've talked about, the grains, also have gluten in them, it can be a bit of a problem for someone with celiac disease to get the variety in their diet that they need, especially fiber and minerals and vitamins. So it's really important that if a person thinks that they have this condition, that they get proper testing and diagnosis by a doctor before they cut the gluten out of their diet, just to make sure that they're getting everything that they need in their diet to remain healthy. Other people may have a gluten or wheat intolerance, and that happens to around 1 in 10 people, so it's much more common. And this can have a range of symptoms from bloating, diarrhea, and an upset stomach, or constipation as well, worsening skin conditions, or worse, asthma when they're having wheat products or gluten products. And again, it's important to talk to a doctor or a dietitian or a nutritionist to rule out other things that could be going on, as well as making sure you get the support you need and don't miss out on important nutrients. So the bottom line is, don't just remove the food group, make sure you get checked out first. So in summary, foods containing carbohydrates should be included in our diet every day. Choose a wide variety and choose whole grain and whole food sources as much as possible. Don't limit or remove a food group from your diet without advice and follow up from a doctor or a dietitian. Again, to make sure that you're not missing out on things that you need for your health. This is an excellent resource that we use at Harbour Sport, and it's written by nutritionists, dietitians, and other health experts following the most up-to-date research and guidelines. It has fantastic search features, meaning you can choose recipes and make shopping lists based on what you have available, or if you need to look at special diets. It also has really sound and easy to read articles about all sorts of health questions in different stages and ages of life. If you're interested in purchasing this for our discounted price, then head to our online shop on the Harbour Sport website. Thank you for listening. And if you have any questions, please get in touch with us.